I'm really delighted to be able to be part of this session. So I do have some slides to share with you today, and as Adam said, we will be sharing these. There is on some of them quite a bit of detail. So yeah, just very quickly, the Audience Agency is a charity. We work only in the arts and culture, museums and heritage sector. We do lots of different things, which I won't go into in detail now, but the commonality is it's all focused on helping organisations to reach, engage, grow audiences in lots of different ways. And as Adam said, my specialism in that way is digital. So using digital tools and platforms to reach audiences, engage them, grow them, etc. So over the last 12 months, we have been conducting a few different pieces of original research, and I'm going to share just some highlights today. And it really is only highlights there. We've got a huge amount of original data, which covers, as this slide indicates, it covers people's engagement in arts and culture before and during COVID, both in person, online, which is obviously what I'm going to talk about today, and lots of other information as well around people's experiences of COVID. Predominantly today, I'm going to be sharing some key findings from two different pieces of research, and just very quickly to talk a little bit about those so you have a bit of context. The first is something called the Cultural Participation Monitor, and the second is something called the Digital Audience Survey. So let me just explain the differences between the two. I should say that with both of these, they are ongoing research. So we will be continuing this research to see, of course, how things change once we hopefully get through all of this. So firstly, the Digital Audience Survey is a pop-up survey that is running currently on around 300 websites, and it essentially asks people to answer a few key questions to help those organizations and us understand about a little bit about who they are, what their motivations are to engage digitally, what they have been doing online, and how that's changed through COVID. So just hold that thought for a second. The COVID Cultural Participation Monitor is a slightly different type of research. It is a quantitative piece of research that is funded by AHRC as part of the Centre for Cultural Values COVID-19 impacts on the cultural industries and the implication for policies research, which actually is led by Ben Walmsley, who is speaking later today. The main thing you need to be aware of, or just kind of I want you to be mindful of with the COVID Participation Monitor, is that it is a whole population survey. So well, not it's a representative sample, or that's what we call a whole population survey. So the key difference between those two pieces of research is that the Digital Audience Survey, you can think of that as existing audiences for arts and culture organisations. If somebody is on your website, they are likely to be an existing audience, an engaged audience. Whereas the Cultural Participation Monitor is it's a sample of the whole population. So that helps us understand about people's engagement with arts and culture and their experiences of COVID beyond that core arts audience. So they are slightly different in terms of what they are doing. The other thing I should just very quickly say is that some of you may be familiar with an audience segmentation system that we use called Audience Spectrum. I just want to mention this though, for those of you who aren't. Audience, and the reason for mentioning this is because the research looks at how different segments are engaging and have engaged online. I won't go into lots of detail on this now because we don't have time, but essentially the key thing to know for those of you who are new to Audience Spectrum is that it is a cultural participation specific segmentation. And there are, you can see the names of the different segments here. Some of those segments, the ones in orange are highly engaged, and then you have ones that are sort of middle engaged, that's the kind of greeny yellow, and then the ones that are lower engaged segmentation. So that segmentation is used by all sorts of cultural organizations to help them understand their existing audiences and to help them think about who their audiences could be. So with all that preamble out the way, let me talk a little bit about some of the key findings of this research. And as I say, this is really a snapshot. On our website, there is a huge amount of additional insights you can get and reports that you can download. So top line, in terms of findings, 41% of people have done some kind of cultural activity in the year before COVID, and 43% have done something online during the pandemic. So actually, you can see there that there's not been a huge increase in the overall percentage of people engaging online. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I'll come on to talk about that. So they're not necessarily proportionally larger audiences. And in terms of future intentions, 47% of people say they expect to do online cultural activity of some kind, even once there is no risk from COVID and things are back open again. I appreciate that this kind of slide might be quite tricky for you to kind of look at the detail of on screen, which is why we said we're happy to share them. But essentially, this breaks down types of digital engagement. So the most popular was things like watching a music gig online, or watching a play or a drama or a musical. So we can see, looking at this research, the different types of activity that people are doing and how and in each case is comparing sort of what they've done during the pandemic to before. And as I say, as we go forward with this research, we will be able to track changes in behaviour even when we come out of lockdown, fingers crossed. I'm going to whiz past this slide because it's for those of you who are using Audience Spectrum, it's just a flag to note that, as I say, we can look at engagement by different engagement online by different audience spectrum segments. So that can be useful from a planning perspective. And we also looked at sort of how online engagement varied in different regions of the UK. Of course, when it comes to the digital audience survey that's been running on people's websites, that also picks up some international audiences, but the COVID participation monitor is UK only. And this is really looking at the UK audience. And we can see that the highest is London and the lowest is Wales. So this is interesting and perhaps counterintuitive. In actual fact, digital engagement fell if we compare, so comparing the period before March 2020 with the period after, we can see that digital engagement actually fell. So that, I think, is perhaps counterintuitive. Notably, it actually fell more for different groups. So for those groups for those households that have children in, engagement online actually dropped. And so again, this is a sort of note really that I think there was a perception that everybody was rushing into kind of Zoom experiences and watching the streaming online, but actually for a lot of people who are doing homeschooling, I think there were issues around Zoom fatigue and things like that, screen fatigue, I should say. So critically, although if you on that my original overview screen, it mentioned that sort of 41% of people had engaged during COVID, 41 pre-COVID and 43% during. And although that's roughly about the same percentage of the population, actually 53% of those were doing more. So the key thing really for that is, from an audience perspective, what we're seeing here is it's similar audiences, but they are engaging more online. So it's not that we have, as a sector, suddenly reached like incredibly different or broader audiences. We've been engaging similar audiences, but more. So I think that's quite a key point to be mindful of. So these next few slides I'm going to show are actually taken from analysis of the digital survey data back in November. So bear in mind that they're not the most up to date. We are about to do a new analysis of the latest data that we have on the digital audience survey. But I wanted to talk about this because I think it's interesting. You know, it's always important to understand the motivations of your audiences. Why are they engaging with you? Why aren't they? What do they want, etc. So although this is from the end of last year, I think it's quite interesting food for thought. So we ask people about, their motivation to engage online. So, why is it that you're doing this thing? And the highest proportion was people were motivated either to learn something or to be intellectually stimulated. And that is very much something that I've seen mirrored in other research, that this kind of driver for learning and intellectual stimulation. Of course, people were also looking to be entertained. Of course they were. We were all, locked inside, as it were. But that actually, the proportion of people engaging online to be entertained dropped between the period of August and November. So again, what we might have been seeing there was a bit of sort of screen fatigue. Lots of people saying that they were engaging for sort of well-being type reasons, so to boost mood, reduce stress and anxiety. So just a note really there that that motivational understanding really key when you're thinking about what you might develop for which audiences. I know I'm moving through this at pace, by the way. I'm just very mindful of time. So another strand of the research that you might be interested in is we ask people about whether they have paid for online content and experiences. Generally, as you would probably expect, the proportion of people who paid for content was fairly low. However, that in some cases that was because what they were accessing was actually free. But you can see here on this slide that it gives you a kind of overview of the percentage of people who bought a ticket or donated. When we look at that by age, it's perhaps not what you'd expect, in the sense that although older people were more likely to have paid via some kind of existing membership that they had, there's actually very little difference in the ages between those who were younger and older when it came to buying actually paying for a ticket. Older people less likely to have paid using a kind of pay what that sometimes people have this pay what you can afford or pay what you like model. That was less common in those older age groups, and I think we can kind of think about why that might be. Just to flag as well that in the research, we don't only ask people about things like what have they done. We also ask them more general questions about things like, for example, their social media use. So I'm not going to linger on these slides. I just want you to be aware that these we do have this data here. So we ask people about their overall social media use, which social media channels do they use. You can see there, probably no surprise, kind of Facebook comes out top, and it kind of sliding scale. And we can look at that. We can also look at that do the analysis based on audience spectrum segment. Again, for those of you who use that, that might be an interesting planning thing to be aware of, and by age. So again, just to make you aware that in terms of the research, there's all sorts of additional information that may help you from a planning perspective. So just to quickly think about future intentions, we do ask people, you know, about what their intentions are in terms of digital engagement going forward. The good news is that it is expected to hold up in terms of that kind of online activity. 37% said that they will continue to kind of watch in the future. That does vary by segment. Again, for those of you who are using audience spectrum segment, that's yeah, I think that's quite a useful note to be aware of, that there is big variations in terms of how different segments expect to engage online in the future. So what does all this mean? I think first thing to say is, although there's, you know, of course, there's been an increase in the amount of content and activities and experiences that the arts and culture sector have been sharing online, there isn't much evidence to suggest that this has translated to a wider reach in terms of audience type. So essentially what we've got is more activity by core audiences, but there is an appetite, there is a demonstrable appetite, you know, for them to continue that engagement. Interestingly, the growth was actually in a post-retirement age. So just to quickly explain that point in relation to younger audiences, the COVID participation monitor shows that younger audiences are engaging online, but the digital audience survey, they're less prevalent. So that could show that essentially those younger audiences are not engaging with traditional arts and culture organisations. And those audiences who are engaging most online are also the strongest prospects in terms of future in-person engagement. So again, from a planning perspective, that I think is interesting to think about. And learning was definitely a key motivator. So you know, that may continue. That, as I say, I've seen other research that suggests that has definitely been a successful factor for many organisations. I'll whiz past this slide because obviously, you know, some of you are not audience spectrum users. There's a link there, as I say, to lots more insights. I think the last thing I will say, and then I'll finish up, is from, you know, my perspective of talking to hundreds literally of arts and culture organisations of all sites, of all sizes, across all art forms, in the last 12 months, I think the most successful digital activities have done, you know, one of these things. They have been developed with a clear audience group in mind. So it was not a case of let's just throw it online and hope that people engage with it. They were things that were created for the digital environment. So that means that they are best viewed in that environment. Again, happy to talk about that some more. You know, what's the purpose of the thing? Is it to entertain? Is it to teach somebody something? Is it just a distraction, etc.? High quality is really important. That doesn't mean doesn't mean massive budgets and very complex and technically complex and sophisticated events. It does mean thinking about things like the quality of the audio, the quality of the video. It means a kind of a bit of care and attention. And I think the final thing is, you know, you cannot underestimate the importance of whatever it is that you're doing, promoting it and you know, having a really strong marketing plan for it. There was historically, there's been this sense of, oh, you know, digital will allow us to reach all, you know, this massive new audience. The reality is there's a, you know, intensely fierce competition online for people's attention, and you are competing for that attention. So even, you know, even your sort of existing audiences, you really need to ensure that you have a good plan make them aware of what you're doing. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of, just for some food for thought. All my contact details are there. As I say, we will share these slides, and there's lots of other insights you can get via our website.